So I'll begin. I don't know how many people I'm speaking to. I can't quite see what the like. I only see one other participant. I don't see sort of the mass of participants. So I'm just going to start, imagining at least that there are people out there to whom I'm speaking. Okay. So my name is Peter Vale. I'm at the National University of Singapore. And at the National University of Singapore, we have started a new honors college that is inaugurated just for the last couple months. We just started it in August, and I'm a member of that faculty. The honors college was, or let's say is, sort of an amalgam of previous programs. One called the University Scholars Program, and a second which was a campus of Yale University from the U.S., had a campus within NUS. And so what was USP and what is Yale have now merged. And that new merging is now the Honors College, the NSUC College, National University of Singapore College here in Singapore. So I was in the predecessor program, the University Scholar Program, for many years, since 2009. So even though everyone is new to the NUS College, some of us are kind of like old hands at the curriculum and writing the curriculum and doing those sorts of things. Okay. With that new college comes a lot of new initiatives. And it's one of those initiatives in particular that I'm going to discuss and that I hope will inaugurate some of the questions and whatnot that will come as a result, which I'm hoping I see in the comments on the right there. Okay. So assuming that that everyone can see slides, I will move to next slide. Okay. The thing that we're interested in talking about here now, and which is like a focal point of the NUS College, is a new emphasis on experiential learning. And we want to talk in some detail today in this session about experiential learning in two ways. First of all, one, how we might differentiate it from other kind of learning that you do in the university. And then two, specifically the way that we see it working and how it's going to be instantiated here, right? Because it's a rather broad label, and so we want to say in detail maybe how it works out here. Okay, so as I mentioned, NUS College is this new initiative at the National University of Singapore. It's an interdisciplinary undergraduate honors college, and so we have students coming in from all different kinds of majors, from everything from engineering and law and arts and sciences and design and business and all sorts of things. Yeah. For me, I'm an anthropologist, and I've been for many years in the predecessor to the college, in the University Scholars Program, sort of one of the parents of the current college there. I was heavily involved in the experiential learning component and ran many modules and whatnot in terms of experiential learning. So I'm pretty integral now into what the NUS College is going to do in terms of moving ahead with its plans for experiential learning. Now, just a quick note on anthropology. I don't know what you all know about anthropology in the background, but it might be a basic question of why an anthropologist would be interested in something experiential learning. So I just want to make a quick aside about why that's the case, because it'll factor in to understanding the type of experiential learning that we'll be discussing in a few moments. So anthropology, like the common maybe understanding or misunderstanding about anthropology, is that it's basically studying, sort of the bones of sort of pre-human forms, whether we're looking at Australopithecus, Homo erectus, sort of those sorts of things. And certainly that is part of anthropology, but that's only one part of it. So in the US, where I trained, commonly you think of anthropology as consisting of 4 fields with many subfields. But that would be like physical anthropology, which is that kind of, human ancestor, evolutionary anthropology sort of stuff. Archaeology, looking at material remains, not only of famous places, like Egypt or Angkor Wat or whatever, but pretty much anywhere where there's been human habitation and what sort of information we can glean from human lives in the past based on material records that we can still find in the present. Linguistic anthropology, sort of the relation between cognition, culture, and language, and how language mediates between those two. And then cultural anthropology, and how cultural anthropology understands how culture is integral to making us human, and how we understand the world, how everything happens basically through the filter of culture. So we look in cultural anthropology, among other things, at issues of things like cultural change, but also things like maybe social development, and it involves a fair amount of field work. I mean, usually it's sort of the backbone of our field is field work. So people like me, anthropologists who are in a program like this, that is the Honors College at NUS, we gravitate towards being able to do classes in experiential learning. And so me and my fellow anthropologists in the college have really, are moving in a big way into this big initiative. Okay. So, but we want to talk about this in context more in sort of a pedagogical fashion. That is, what are the different sort of modes of learning that you do when you're at university level? And then how does experiential learning factor into that? So when you enroll in university, you're going to be confronted with all different ways in which you're expected to learn, and you'll find all different styles of teaching. So what we're going to talk about now is not there to somehow endorse, maybe one mode over other modes. That's not the object here, right? Every mode of teaching has sort of affordances and constraints. It has good things, it has bad things, advantages, disadvantages, and whatnot. What we want to do here is for you, first of all, to have a bit of a meta awareness to understand those kind of different modes of teaching and learning, and then to focus in particular on experiential learning so that you see where we're coming from with this huge initiative that we're undertaking at the college. So what we're going to discuss and we'll discuss most of these very briefly, and then we'll expand on the last one on the experiential learning part, yeah? And that is, we're going to look at what we might call passive learning. We're looking at what we might call didactic learning, active learning, problem-based learning and interdisciplinarity, service learning, what's sometimes been called adventure learning. And then lastly, we're really going to focus in particular on experiential learning, again, because of the initiative that's underway at the new NUS Honors College. Now, this list of like different modes of teaching and learning is not meant to be exhaustive. There's other ways, other things that you'll experience, other ways that universities are innovating to do this. And there's a lot of overlap in these kind of categories, right? It's not like they're somehow pure, pedagogical modes. Okay. So when we think about something like passive learning, and it gets kind of a bad rep, but, maybe undeservedly so, you might think of passive learning as those activities you do at university where you're maybe taking in information, but not necessarily like having to process it in any kind of an active way. So maybe you're reading books and articles, which is obviously a huge part of what you're going to do in university. Watching documentary films, maybe listening to lectures, those sorts of things. Now, there's a lot of advantages to something like passive learning, right? It's relatively fast. You can get like a lot of information at your own sort of paced time. For university, it's a great thing because it has relatively low labor requirements because the faculty-student ratio is going to be, you can really skew it like you see in the photo there of the massive lecture hall here at NUS. It can be standardized, which is important if you're looking for like particular majors. You need to have standard education in those majors to be able to grant degrees. But there's also disadvantages, and some of the disadvantages are obvious, right? You don't want to be just a cog in, a giant classroom, right? You want to be able to interact with your professors and those sorts of things, right? So there's also like no clear way in passive learning to be able to deploy the knowledge that you've learned, right? You need to be able to somehow figure that out on your own, or it needs to be built into some later kind of module in which you're now going to have like, you've done your theory, now you got to do your application or whatever. Okay? It's also hard to have meaningful assessments because with so many people, you end up doing like, tests and quizzes and those sorts of things, rather than stuff that really has you sort of grapple with the material. So again, there's advantages, disadvantages, and whatnot. Yeah, but it's a very common thing that you're going to encounter once you're in university. We might rethink that a little bit in terms of what we might call didactic learning. And didactic learning is still, the premise is that the person who's doing the teaching has the knowledge, and that those students in the class are somehow gaining that knowledge, and that you're going to be somehow getting that from the instructor. But typically, instead of being like in that passive learning mode, it'll typically happen in like a structured way through what we might call something like Socratic method of questioning, right? So that the professor will ask you like a series of questions that's meant to lead you to particular insights. Now, there's good advantage, and it's very common in university. You'll definitely encounter this if you come to a university like NUS or anything with, classroom sizes of, whatever, 30-ish. Is a very common mode of teaching and learning, yeah? So the advantages are that you still are fully exploiting kind of the expert knowledge of the person who's teaching the class. And also you can learn like how that process of questioning has a logic to it, so that you see how the strategy works and how it connects to the content, such that you can start to get like a bigger awareness of the way that you are being educated. And it ends up being a lot more interactive than that sort of passive learning and the big lecture hall stuff that we were talking about, if only for the reason that the classes are typically going to be much smaller. But the disadvantage remains, and that is that there's not all that much room for you to like grapple with or to deploy sort of new knowledge, right? That is, you're still basically being told knowledge by somebody who has more knowledge than you. And it's not an issue of like processing or deploying that knowledge. So that might contrast then with the model that we might call active learning, right? And active learning, the idea is that the content is way more open-ended. So it's what we might call constructivist, right? So that students are going to participate in the construction of that knowledge. And the way that works is typically in a format that might be like a seminar format, right? So that now suddenly it's not just, say, the professor who's providing you information, but rather you need to be bringing in information. Perhaps you found an article that you think is worth discussing, ideas that you want to contest these other ideas with, so that the doing and the deployment of that knowledge becomes part of the knowing of that knowledge. And this approach, this active learning approach, is typically regarded as like far more student-centered. And the idea there is that that you have to like use the knowledge and grapple with it and otherwise deploy it. In other words, to truly understand it. The disadvantages in a system like this is that you're never going to quite get that full expert knowledge of the person who knows what they're doing, right? Because you might go off on tangents, you might have a different interpretation of what is going on. And so the professor might turn out, rather than being like the source of expert knowledge, might be more the facilitator of somehow reaching a stage where you can have, say, good arguments or solid backing or critical questions or things like that. But the other problem is that maybe things go slower, because as students are grappling with things, you can't quite move as fast as you would in something like reading a book or presenting a lecture or doing something like that. And it also becomes rather time intensive, both for student and for professor. But that being said, active learning is like, this is how you really master information, is because you're not just hearing it, you're actually using it. From there, we might move on to something like problem-based learning, which intersects with interdisciplinarity. And that interdisciplinarity is like a real key feature in something like an honors college, because students are coming from all different backgrounds and disciplinary backgrounds, yeah? And you want to be able to think across those disciplinary lines, yeah? If you learn to understand a problem, whatever it is, from, say, like a different perspective, right? Maybe it gives you new insights and to your own field, right? That is, how does something of like, maybe you're studying agriculture, how does that also become a problem of, say, sociology, or how does that become a problem of economics, right? That, in other words, maybe problems are harder to solve than you thought because they are not to be accounted for solely in a single discipline. So now the thing with problem-based learning is that it's going to foster a lot more open-ended questioning, and you as the student have to provide that kind of questioning, right? That you have to address the problem and grapple with the problem and bring in those interdisciplinary perspectives in ways that are going to help you address that problem. It also makes you hyper aware of what it means to be in different disciplines, and that maybe your way of imagining a problem is not the same way as maybe one of your peers is. And that really helps you kind of think outside of like a disciplinary box. Now, the advantages are here, that as a student, it's really going to cultivate these other sorts of skills. It's not how well you can take tests or how fast you can read books or how eloquently you can write a paper, but you're going to have to be able to demonstrate other stuff, resourcefulness, integrated thinking, how much initiative you have to actually go and address the problem like in real life, some sort of creativity to maybe make, logical and disciplinary leaps to be able to find new ways to address, thorny problems. The disadvantages can be also there. Yeah. One of the problems there is that it in ways kind of diminishes the idea of disciplinary thinking. Like the whole point of disciplines is that you've got this very structured way of tackling particular problems. But if you're doing interdisciplinary thinking, well, the danger is that like how many disciplines can you know? So do you end up with sort of a broader but more superficial understanding of a problem because you haven't specialized and really looked critically through the lens of a single discipline? So that kind of breadth versus depth problem is certainly an issue when we're dealing with things like interdisciplinarity. It can also be hard because even among professors, interdisciplinarity can be difficult. So you as a student might have to be drawing on different faculty members to get like disciplinary insights from different people. And if you do that, well, then it's kind of incumbent on you to be able to figure out how those things go together. Yeah. And that is obviously not so easy, especially if you have not been thoroughly trained in those disciplines. Moving along, there's other very popular now these days, especially in places like, honors colleges, these sorts of things, is a work on service learning. And the idea of service learning is that you're combining education with some kind of community service work. And there, the idea is that the classroom, the stuff you do in the classroom has to connect with doing something, quote unquote, real in the real world. That maybe you're going to, work among children, or you'll work in a senior center, or you'll work somehow helping local environment or doing something. And the idea there is that instead of just learning what you would learn in university for your own purposes, you are also learning about the values of things like community service, maybe volunteer programs, maybe how all those things work, maybe how you can be, contributing as a good citizen, those sorts of things, which are very important. And that it fosters that sense of wanting to actually do something good with the education that you're getting at university. So now the advantages of this, of service learning stuff, right, is that you create a lot of linkages to services, organizations, and all that. And it's a good entry into things like your own processes of reflection, like who you are, why you're doing all this stuff at university, what kind of person you are, what you can contribute, and so forth. And making those thought processes of reflection kind of a basic practice with how you approach different things that you do in life. And that's what we might call more like reflexivity, that it's a constant habit to think about, what is your role and what it is that you're doing. Who are you to be helping these, the children, or the senior citizens, or helping the environment, or doing whatever. And to kind of have a good, clear, critical grasp of your own position and your own role is highly valuable. And therefore, service learning is highly valued in places like honors colleges, whatnot. So that the kind of knowledge that you deal with in a service learning environment is not only about the knowledge, but it's also about the affect, that is like who you are, how you feel about doing this different type of work, how you imagine yourself as being a productive kind of member of the community, that sort of stuff, how you build rapport with people in the community, how you tender social relations, all these other sorts of soft skills, in addition to the things we talked a moment ago about things like resourcefulness and initiative and all that. The disadvantages that I think a lot of people find in service learning environments is that sometimes the classroom component, that is the formal learning that's supposed to structure the things you do in service learning, kind of fade away. And that often the programs might end up, sadly, just kind of like fulfilling some sort of service requirement. How many community hours have you done? And I think that's problematic, right? I mean, it shouldn't be the case that happens, but I think in real life that is the case, that it often happens, that it sort of degrades into just basic community service rather than that linkage between classroom and community service. And in a place like where I work here in Singapore, there's another problem, and that is Singapore is a small country. with a high value on education, so lots and lots of university students, and you very quickly kind of saturate the market. You know, how many senior centers are there? How many NGOs are there that you can work with, and so forth. And lastly, there's also problems in that we probably gravitate when we're doing any kind of like that's community-oriented developmental kind of work, that we gravitate towards what we might call vulnerable groups, right? People at risk, people who are marginalized, people who are somehow disenfranchised, those sorts of things. And then it also becomes like an issue of qualifications, right? Who are you to be dealing with, say, disabled, or who are you to be dealing with people who are not free to make their own decisions, you know, whatever, maybe a prisoner program or something like that. Those qualifications are that's a rough spot. That kind of qualification needs training. And so part of the training is the service learning, but you also have to be trained already to do the service learning. And so there's a lot more that needs to be in place to do those kind of classes than simply offering a class that has you go out and do some service learning. There has to be like programmatically and structurally something there to make sure that you are able to participate in that service learning in like a really meaningful way. Lastly, I'm only going to spend a moment on this. In the 90s, and then also like really during COVID and whatnot, there became this thing about it, like adventure learning, right? And this was like, it was a really cool idea, and they did some like interesting things. There are some problematic parts of it, in particular because of the people or one person in particular involved, the sort of founder of it. But the idea is that the faculty member would be like adventurer and go off and do these things. Arctic exploration was one of the big ones. Ocean dive, you know, these sorts of things was really the big one. And what they would do is transmit all that stuff in real time back to the classroom. And it was great. Like the idea is like there's this excitement of discovery, you know, that's brought into the classroom, and it's done in real time, and it's real discovery, and it's real adventurism and whatnot. And especially like during COVID, you know, when everybody's on lockdown and whatnot, that's super valuable, right? That somebody can go out there and at least we can vicariously kind of participate in that kind of adventurous real world learning. The disadvantage should be kind of obvious, right? It's vicarious. You don't go, you know, they go, and then you sort of participate in their debriefings and all that kind of stuff. So while it's got some good applications and it's kind of interesting overall, I don't think it's like the, you know, like the solution to like really getting adventure into learning. It's just one sort of model of it, I suppose. Okay, that now leads us to finally what I wanted to get at since the beginning, and that is this mode of learning, teaching and learning that broadly might be called experiential learning. And the idea of experiential learning is that it combines a whole bunch of the features from all the stuff that we just talked about a moment ago about active learning and service learning and all that sort of stuff. And the idea of experiential learning is that you're going to go, that a student would go beyond the classroom into sort of immersive field experiences and deploy the type of classroom knowledge they have in some real world setting. My college right now, we're in the planning phase, and that we're really going ahead with this now, is really foregrounding this kind of experiential learning. This is going to be really huge in our nascent program here. So there's a lot of advantages to this kind of experiential learning. First of all, it's really adventurous, and not adventurous in a vicarious way, but adventurous in that like you're really going, right? You go out to the field and you do these different things with preparation. The other advantage is that it doesn't like lose sight of the classroom learning stuff that service learning might do or has historically sort of done, but rather it kind of deploys that classroom learning quite specifically, and also inculcates those sort of soft skills that we were talking about before, things like teamwork, things like resourcefulness, things like problem solving, things like reimagining problems in different interdisciplinary kind of ways, that sort of thing. There are certainly, from a university perspective, disadvantages to experiential learning. It's expensive. It's labor and time intensive, both for faculty and students. It's really hard to grade, so you got to have like really interesting assessments or very creative, innovative kind of assessments, because, you know, otherwise, how do you grade somebody's real world experiences? It requires a lot of commitment on the part of students. And it can be difficult to conduct like in normal semester times unless the out of classroom is not all that geographically distant from the classroom, right? Like, I mean, if you're just going out in the town, okay, that's cool, that's doable. But if you're going to a neighboring country, for example, that's really hard to do during a normal semester time. So then you've got to start to impinge on off times like summers and breaks and that kind of stuff. So you have to find in a curriculum the way to structure that in such a way that it becomes worthwhile to be taking that time and otherwise off times to pursue these kind of experiential learning modules. This builds off of work done like, starting sort of way back in the 80s. And this is like the last sort of theoretical thing that we say before we're going to move into more talking about examples of how this kind of stuff is going to work. So David Kolb wrote a lot about experiential learning, and he sees it as kind of like a cycle, right? That is, concrete experience leads to sort of reflective observation about that concrete experience, which allows you to abstract some sort of conceptualization about that reflective observation. And that allows you to then try to experiment and like actively experiment and rethink maybe what you were doing, and then to go back in the loop to start that again with another concrete experience, right? So like the example, one of the base examples they always give is like riding a bicycle, right? Maybe you ride a bicycle and you got that experience, but something goes wrong. So now you can think about it. Then you could abstract that how maybe you could go do it better. Then you could experiment with keeping your balance better. And then you've got a new concrete experience to try to improve that. So now it's, again, like as the little image there suggests, right? The idea is that somehow you're gaining knowledge by transforming your experiences in this procedural way to be able to turn it into knowledge. Now, the cool thing, and this is like sort of key, is that it accommodates people who like really learn in different styles. So maybe you're the type who like, you like really abstract thinking, and then you can go into practice. Well, okay, then you start in that part of the cycle that's got, to do with sort of abstract conceptualization, and then you move on to your experimentation, concrete experience, and so forth. But maybe you're the type who just really like, is better with just like try it, experience it, and then try to figure out why it worked. Well, then you break into that cycle in a different place. Maybe you break into that cycle in the concrete experience part, and then you get to do those other parts of the process. So the fact that it accommodates those different things, I think, is like a really flexible model for students to come in from all angles into the kind of things you might be able to get out of experiential learning. So in the example that I'll give, the model that we're inaugurating at NUS, at the NUS College, the Honors College right now, is that it's a new initiative, and it will be required of all students. And how we're doing it is that we're going to make it a team-based project. It's going to be called the IEX. I don't know where the acronyms came from, but okay, that's the acronym. And the idea is that it's a 4-credit module that everybody will take, but you will have 2 years in which to do that 2-year module, such that it doesn't just become like, get it done. It's sort of shallow, but whatever. We only had a semester to do it. But rather that over the course of 2 years, you have plenty of breaks, plenty of time to coordinate with team members, plenty of time to like incubate, plenty of time to coordinate with people in your field site that you have selected and whatnot. And then we'll also, because it's a pretty tall order for people who don't specialize in things like fieldwork, we'll also have other modules, like regular modules, regular classes, that also have fieldwork components that will like help prepare you to undertake something as sort of extensive and involved as an experiential learning IEX. And the idea is that it's going to draw on all that kind of interdisciplinary work that you do in your majors and whatnot beforehand. And then you're going to pursue a real world project that your team contrives and somehow get that project going in Singapore or in neighboring countries of Southeast Asia. You see in a picture there is an experiential class that I ran a few years ago in Laos with some of our Singaporean students and one of our translators there on the right. So how we're going to do this is because, again, I talked about sort of market saturation and all that kind of stuff in Singapore. Singapore is like a really good place to do this from. We're sort of lucky this way, insofar as Singapore, as you see on the map there, sits right sort of in the middle geographically of Southeast Asia. And at the university, we have lots of people who specialize in different countries of Southeast Asia. we will therefore be running programs not only in Singapore, but also in Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and students can select from Singapore where they want to go to work on this IEX project and where they might make a difference. And with lots of support and help from specialists in the field and connections in the field, NGOs working in different places, academic institutions in different places and whatnot. And so then the range of things, because we're an interdisciplinary program, our vision for instituting this kind of experiential learning is like sort of broadly conceived, right? So some of the things like me, like I began telling you in the very beginning that I'm an anthropologist, so I'm very interested in things like social development. So that's one of the kinds of things you could do would be social development. Other stuff might be technology and technology transfer or innovating new technology or whatever. Other might be like more specifically research-based, right? Like maybe you work on biological, environmental sorts of things, you know, whatever, fisheries, agriculture, these sorts of things. And there'll be opportunities to design programs that address those things and to enact them in the field. Also arts and expression, creativity, design, those sort of things. Everything is kind of on the table. And the idea is that you will be able to combine and in a larger process, realize that experiential model. So for us, a lot of this stuff derives from things that we had from Yale University, because they had, as you know, a campus within National University of Singapore. And we developed in tandem this thing called the RISE pillars, where RISE means research, innovation, social engagement, expression. And the idea is not that those are siloed, not that you do one or the other, either you do research or you do innovation, but rather that it's a process. So our understanding of the best way to institute experiential learning would be that students will form interdisciplinary teams of like 6, maybe 7 people. They will research an issue over for part of that 2 years. They'll innovate some sort of a project proposal with a proposal process together with faculty. Then they will be engaging a community that they will be working with, not sort of, you know, no savior stuff, none of that kind of stuff, but genuinely collaborating with the community to undertake the project. And then finally, back at university at the end, to like reflect on the experience and the learning in a suitable sort of means of expression. And that might be artistic, that might just be, you know, representational. There's different ways to do it. And the driving idea here is what we might call ABCD, the asset-based community development. And that is like, we're not bringing somehow development to places. I think that's a misplaced idea, but rather that there's already stuff in all those communities, but they need, or they could benefit from sort of student innovation, student energy, somebody undertaking these tasks, distribution of knowledge, shared knowledge, and so forth. Now, students are going to work really closely with faculty is the idea. And all these faculty who are working on it are people who have regional fieldwork experience. So for me, it's mostly Thailand, Laos. We have a Cambodia specialist, Philippine specialist. And that therefore we can offer this sort of wide range of project possibilities and connections. So students will be in groups of about 6 interdisciplinary backgrounds. I see one question coming up about industrial design. Yes, industrial design is certainly part of what can happen in there. In fact, we have some design specialists on the faculty at the moment. You'll have 2 years to complete the project. It would be supervised by a faculty member. And there's funding available from the college so that every student will have a budget to be able to complete the IEX so that it's not financially onerous for any student. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples here now to close up on, so you get like an example of what might constitute something like an IEX. Yeah. As I said, it's a new initiative at our new honors college at the university here. But it isn't being designed from scratch. Rather, we had forerunners based on sort of field-based modules from Southeast Asia that people like me, a few others, were heavily involved in teaching. So I ran modules in Thailand and Laos. And these projects really, the ones I do, focus on social development. But that does not mean that social development is the only type of project you can do. You can do things on industrial design or art or technology transfer or any of these things. I'm only giving these examples because the ones that I taught were of social development. Yeah. So one example here, we worked in a remote part of northern Thailand, up in the mountains, with an upland group called the Lua. And Lua are upland farmers, and they, because of their geographical distribution, the kids are largely taken out of the village and sent to boarding schools. And because they're sent to boarding schools, there's huge problems, right? There's no cultural transmission. People forget their language. They forget culture. They even forget sort of their family because they're off at boarding school for so many years. And the family is, they're working, making a livelihood, farming, doing those sorts of things. And those students can end up with like real problems as marginalized students with low self-esteem and so forth. This is a big issue. I know if you're in Canada, I know there's a lot of issues with boarding schools among First Nations, past history and so forth. And that's the same kind of thing that's getting replicated now in these sorts of boarding schools out in places like the mountains of northern Thailand. So what the students undertook as this participatory experiential project was they linked up with local students and historian, like history students. And what they did is like created like cultural guidebooks in which they photographed and identified all these different cultural markers and so forth that they made into like yearbook like things that they then distributed to those Lua kids who were in boarding schools. And that had like multiple purposes. One is just so that they could remember, everybody, all the different people who live in their village and that sort of thing. But second, it gave them like cultural capital. Like they really became to hold their own culture in high esteem because it had been so well represented in this graphic form in the books and whatnot, and preserved and transmitted lots of these things about culture that would otherwise fade away. Tattooing rituals, different clothes, different types of occupations, let alone things like language and whatnot. Those books turned out to be hugely popular, right? The parents loved them because the students would have like reminders of the family while they were off at boarding school. And the students loved them because it raised their self-esteem. They did better in school. And then they had these cultural and family mementos that kept them connected, even though they were separated, like physically separated from family and whatnot back home. So the students really got a lot out of doing this sort of a project, right? It took them a long time. It took a lot of work. They had to work across languages. They had to do all sorts of stuff. But the product was like really meaningful for all the people who ended up participating in it. And so the students were really proud of their work, and deservedly so. We did another project not too far from there among an upland group called Patanyor Karen, who are known for raising elephants. And the issue with the elephants became that everything got so commercialized and so touristy that the heritage of how to raise elephants and why you raise elephants start to get lost. So the students undertook trying to rethink how a tourism sector in the elephant sector might work. To be able to rethink and to revitalize local understandings among those upland peoples about how their own heritage works with elephants. And it was great. They loved it. And they got to work with elephants. How cool is that? So in working with these kind of things, right, these are not like everyday experiences. All the things that students had to bring to it were incredibly challenging and expansive for the students who worked on it, right? They had to learn so much about how to deal with local histories, how to deal with livelihoods, understanding tourism, understanding elephants, for God's sake. And so it's a project, actually, this is one that we would like to sustain if it's possible in post-COVID period. That whole sector has had a problem.
Professor Vale, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and if you don't mind, I need to stop you there maybe to take a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're describing is a real opportunity to do something really meaningful while students go through their university process. Sheehan asks, our OSSD students are competing with AP and IB students for admissions. So I want to know how many OSSD students can be admitted by NUS in 2003. I don't know if that would fall into your department or you would know about that.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know that we would place any caps on like the backgrounds of whether students are coming from IB programs or from JCs or from polys or whatever. I think it's more about what through the admissions process, what we believe a student would be able to contribute overall to the program and what they would gain from the program. I don't think that we have any sort of quotas on background.
Okay.
We're much more interested in the students themselves.
Right. They also ask, what can I do to make myself stand out on my application? Does the industrial design major need a portfolio?
So those are sort of two different questions.
Yeah.
One of which I can answer and the other which I really cannot. That is because I would represent more the honors college, the interdisciplinary honors college. So I can't really speak to the design school's requirements. I mean, my inclination would be to say, yeah, have a portfolio, man. These are, this is big university with competitive programs. You want to be able to shine. I think the idea, I certainly think that in a place like education in Singapore now, how do you get a leg up? How do you best represent yourself on something like an application process? Is to be, well, first of all, like really aware of like what you want out of your own occasion, out of your own education, right? Don't be sort of just subject to it, but like demonstrate why you want to do what you want to do, that you know what you're doing here. Not to be one-dimensional. That is not to be only thinking about that the only thing you want to do is like, design or something like that, but that you are thinking how you might also cultivate other interests into like, sort of broader education, that kind of stuff. Because a university, especially big ones like this one, right, has so much to offer and so many different things to participate in that I think the idea is the university is always looking for people who are going to really enrich everything that they do. And not have a really sort of a narrowly focused approach.
Right. And finally, can you maybe speak generally about what you think draws students to NUS and how it may differ from other universities in Asia? I know it's a ranked school. What makes it so special?
Yeah, I would be. I don't know that I'd want to contrast it to other schools. I don't want to go dissing other universities or anything. I think certainly one of the appeals for NUS for a lot of people is that you, on the one hand, you have a major, right? And there's a lot of focus on that major, but there's all these different opportunities now to expand on that major in these interdisciplinary kind of ways. So the Honors College is just one of those ways. There are also other residential colleges in which they have, maybe you do whatever, maybe 15% of your credits with them, right? Our program, it's more about like 30 plus credit, 30% of your credits or so forth that you would do with us in these interdisciplinary sort of classes. So that the idea is that you're kind of getting best of both worlds, right? You're getting fully trained in the major of your choice, but then you also have a fair bit of leeway to be able to pursue other interests and to enrich your academic life in other ways. The other thing is Singapore, man, geographically is like in a great place. Like I'm an American who's been working in Singapore for a long time, and I spend much of my life in Thailand. Singapore is great because everything is a commuter flight. You can go to 10 different countries surrounding here on a commuter flight. So if you want to enrich yourself with things like travel and all that kind of stuff in the region, man, Singapore is a great place to be. Just for like, in addition to doing academic work, life is like, can be really fulfilling. It can be really good here because you've got access to so many different things to do, including, the affordability to going to those places. I know, students got to watch the money, man. So that there's like a huge amount of things to do in life, in addition to, and sort of in order to enrich kind of like university experience coming here.
Yeah. And I think your program that you've described is all about that. It sounds like a very progressive and refreshing approach to teaching and learning. And it seems like a great opportunity to not only get a degree, but possibly encounter a life-changing experience for yourself as a learner.
That's the goal. You know, what I would say is that, like, we're positioned to be able to do that stuff here in Southeast Asia because of Singapore's geographical location. So let's do it, you know?
Yeah.
I think we should.
And with that, I think we've run out of time. So I do want to thank you very much for this presentation. And if students want to learn more about this, I assume they can go on to the NUS website where they can get some more information about the program or the college.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, of course, like NUS's like general website. And then there's the NUSC, that is the National University Singapore College. That is our honors college that will have its own website now. But we're like brand new, up and coming. And so, you know, maybe not all of that website has been, you know, detailed out. It's getting there.
Gotcha.
And certainly there's going to be contacts and whatnot to be able to liaise with, to be able to get further information, admissions requirements, visa requirements, all those sorts of things are going to be available there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think people now need to head on to their next session, and best of luck to you. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much.